Hundreds of years ago, native tribes of Alaska hunted their treasure. It is their sustenance and is extremely plentiful right before the arrival of the long winter. Their treasure is salmon, which my brother covered in the previous episode. About 200 years ago, white settlers came to Alaska seeking a new treasure, the gold, which made some rich while costing others their lives. Eventually, that dried up. However, Alaska is the land of plenty, and a new treasure continues to provide prosperity for the people today. To understand the history of the Alaskan gold rush, Skagway is the city to visit. In the late 1800s, Joe Juneau found gold while prospecting in the Yukon Territory, and that started the Alaskan gold rush. Skagway became the main port for miners, as its deep waters don't freeze. You can extrapolate from the steep mountains hugging the channel about how deep it is. Shipments can go in and out well before other ports have thawed. Once on land, a 33-mile path up the mountain would lead the prospectors to the Yukon River, which can transport them to the gold fields by rafts. Well over 100,000 people passed through Skagway in hopes of striking it rich, but only 30% of people even made it to Yukon. The prospectors were required to carry a literal ton of resources to prevent starvation. So many had to make the journey many times. Most of the loads were carried by horses or oxen. Driven by greed, people were brutal to their service animals, which led to thousands of deaths. This gold rush brought over 1,000 tons, or $11.5 billion of gold, all in a short span of 3 years. A railway was built for the steam trains at the peak of the rush, but by the time it was completed, the rush was almost over. This railway is still operational, but for tourists only. Yet, in many ways, tourism was the new treasure of Alaska, as each year, millions of tourists visit the land, bringing way more riches than the gold fields ever did. People come far and wide to see the natural beauty of Alaska. The crown jewel is no doubt the glaciers. Some of the top places to see glaciers are College Fjord and Glacier Bay, but they're only accessible by boat. Our breath was taken away when we floated in the calm bay surrounded by the newly calved off icebergs, and in front of us were several glaciers that were hundreds of meters tall. Our high vantage point also allowed us to see miles up the mountain and trace the path of these amazing glaciers. They take hundreds of years to form and are constantly advancing or receding. Glaciers are formed when snow at the top of a mountain builds up. The snow at the bottom is compressed by millions of pounds of pressure, and then turns into solid ice with no air bubbles. Sunlight is all absorbed except for the blue wavelength by these ice crystals, leaving you with a pure blue color that you can't stop staring at. You can only see blue ice when huge chunks of ice have recently fallen off, as quickly the warm air would change the crystal structure on the surface, turning it white. Depending on the slope and snowfall, glaciers can move up to 3 feet per day. The immense pressure of the glacier can carve valleys and create lakes. They grind rocks into extremely fine silt that, when melted, gives glacial lakes and rivers a milky look. On a sunny day, the White Mountains, blue ice, gray rocks, and Teal Bay form the most unforgettable views I've ever seen in my life. We have spent over a week in Alaska, and I was completely awed by the wonders of nature that it had to offer. The Alaskan treasure for me was spending time with my family in the wilderness and meeting animals such as the Alaskan husky puppies. I loved Alaska so much that I didn't even mind donating a substantial amount of blood to the unofficial Alaskan state bird, the mosquitoes. I have a feeling that I will be back.